If you like comic books, and if you like films, and as Film 2012's resident geek, I'm partial to both, then you're in for a treat this summer. For right now, comic book movies are huge in Hollywood. Over the last 10 years, comic book movies have taken more than $6.5 billion at the US box office alone, and this summer could be the biggest yet for films ripped from the pages of the four-color funny books.
It's called the Avengers Initiative.
First up is Marvel's Avengers Assemble, the groundbreaking team-up of characters like the Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America.
Guys, I'm bringing the party to you.
Then we have The Amazing Spider-Man, a reboot of your friendly neighborhood web-slinger.
We all have secrets. The ones we keep, and the ones that are kept from us.
And last but not least, the film that promises to be the biggest of the year. The Dark Knight Rises, Christopher Nolan's conclusion to his epic and gritty Caped Crusader trilogy.
There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne.
Expect those three alone to add on another billion at least in what should be the most successful year yet for comic book movies. Yet it hasn't always been this way. Before Sam Raimi's Spider-Man broke box office records in 2002, Hollywood had largely sneered at superheroes. Yes, there had been the odd monster hit, but for the most part adaptations were cheap, campy, and contemptuous of their origins. Three words for you: Batman and Robin.
I want a car. Chicks dig the car.
This is why Superman works alone.
So what changed? We asked a few people with the inside track.
The problem was, at that time, was overkill. They just kept making and making and making films, any property they could get their hands on, and usually they just weren't done very well.
A lot of the Marvel movies that were made in the 80s and the 90s in particular had very low budgets. And I think lots of people meant well and tried their best to be political about it. But it just wasn't, it was sort of doomed from the start to fail.
Computer graphics really, late 90s into the early 2000s, suddenly it opened up to a place where, people could figure out how to do it technically and they could afford to do it.
There hadn't been a lot of comic book films that had really used the comics and the emotion of the comics and the story of the comics and the deep sort of characterizations of the comics as the jumping off point.
Generally, it was the kind of guy that would be doing Jaws 4 or something, that would be doing a comic book movie. But then something happens, around about 1999, 2000, like really good guys come in.
As the profile of comic book movies has risen, so has the caliber of directors associated with them. People like Guillermo del Toro, Chris Nolan, Bryan Singer and Edgar Wright have all made funny book films strong enough artistically and thematically to silence critics who think that comic books are just for kids.
A lot of filmmakers now who are comic book fans themselves, so they know that it can be very much appreciated by the world at large. And they also hate it when people screw around with them.
The minute the Bryan Singers and the Ang Lees and so on started coming in, people were starting to sit up and take notice. And what it did was it attracted in other good directors, because then you had guys like Chris Nolan and so on coming through, and Zack Snyder now doing Superman.
I would certainly say there are a lot more geeks in the upper offices of the studios than there were a decade ago. And that has certainly helped. That certainly helped the cause.
Things like Dark Knight and Batman Begins really kind of hit something special. They seem to be coming at it from not a desire to raise the comic book up, just a desire to tell a great story and be as mature as they possibly can be. And it's almost despite that it's a comic book.
Audiences are ever more sophisticated. What they want is not only to be entertained with a spectacle, but they want to think as well.
But there's an ominous threat lurking on the horizon for our heroes. Will audiences get sick of the seemingly never-ending onslaught of bigger, more lavish super blockbusters? Simply put, will the comic book movie bubble burst?
A lot of people have been anticipating the collapse of the comic book movie, but if anything, it just seems to get bigger all the time, and this year looks to be like a monster year. It's like nothing we've ever seen.
If you look at the Superman symbol, it's one of the most recognizable symbols in the world, so everyone knows these characters, and successive generations keep coming back to them.
We've been publishing at Marvel, 50, 100 comics a month, every month, for 60 years. That's a lot of stories. The bubble hasn't burst there. That is a lot of stories. Could we turn every single one of them into a movie? Of course not. But even if there's a small fraction of them that we could, it can last for a long time, as long as they're all unique.
The trick is that if you tell a story well enough, people will want to see it. Even if they think it has all the ingredients to something they're not interested in.
I think the bubble can't burst, and I hate to sound like Gordon Brown, it does sound a bit like there'll be no return to boom and bust here, but I think it's impossible for it to burst now, because what you have to remember is that comics isn't a genre, comics is a medium.
Frankly, it's hard to see it happening. Complaining about the amount of adaptations of graphic novels is a bit like complaining about the amount of adaptations of novels. And for those moaning about the lack of variety, it's not all about dudes in spandex punching bigger dudes in spandex. Both Ghost World and Road to Perdition were comic book movies. And with 2013 bringing us Superman and Iron Man and more, it's clear that the caped and masked and tights-wearing Crusaders aren't going away, you know. And for me, that's just super. No, amazing. No, fantastic. This is really hard.